I'm Keith, and I like parties. But have you ever gotten to a party or maybe walked into a church building and you get to the door and you open it up and all you see is butts or backs? Yeah, that feels terrible. Why? Well, it's because deep within every single person is a longing to be brought into something. Not to be a bystander or an outsider, but to actually walk alongside with people and feel like you're in an atmosphere of trust. See, this need to belong, this desire to feel welcomed, it goes beyond a door opening for you or being even brought into a building. It goes far deeper. The desire to be welcomed is rooted in the basic need to belong. Now, do you remember we told you about the story of Zacchaeus? In the story, Zacchaeus is up in the tree and Jesus says, "Come on down immediately, I'm going to come to your house today." Then right after that, we're told that Zacchaeus comes down at once and welcomes Jesus gladly. See, even though Zacchaeus is the technical host, it's him that is welcomed into the presence of Jesus first. And then his response is that he welcomes Jesus into his house too. Isn't this a beautiful glimpse of hospitality? Maybe we need to learn how to open our doors a little wider.
Oh, hey, Keith, come on in.
And that's exactly what the early church did. They learned the way of Jesus from so many of his examples of eating literally with anyone and everyone, that they began to also welcome people into their homes and around their tables, practicing radical hospitality.
In the New Testament, the Greek word for hospitality is philoxenia, which is a combination of two words, philo, which means love, and xenos, which means stranger.
So do you understand what hospitality is then? It literally means loving strangers until they become friends. So when the church began to practice this, they began to grow so radically. It became a part of every single Christian expression. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, the writer in chapter 13 challenges the church to remain strong in their practice of hospitality because sometimes they might even be entertaining angels without realizing it. Can you imagine being so terrified of shutting people out because you think you might have just shut down an angel? I bet they got good results after that. So what do we do today in the church to continue to grow in this area? Well, maybe it means we have to define a new starting point for how we look at community. So for a long time, the starting point for this type of Christian faith community has always been founded on belief. So before you could become a part of a community, you had to first believe everything that that community believed. So if you did the right believing, then you were welcomed into the community and you could belong with it. Now the problem is that if people are not believing what you're believing and you long to reach out to them, but the only way they can belong with you is if they believe what you believe, do you understand what's happening? They will never, ever enter your community. They won't explore it. So what we're seeking to do, and what I believe is a Jesus-centered approach, is actually starting with belonging and creating spaces where people can come in with any sort of ideas, any sort of sense of what God's up to, any sort of questions, and still find a place of belonging. And then when we do that, we find that it actually makes believing easier for people. And of course, how do you create a sense of belonging? You do it through a meal. Let's be people who offer belonging. Okay, it's time to take a look at some core practices that can help us create a culture of welcome.
Assume friendship.
This first one's about our attitudes more than our actions. We told you about what hospitality actually means, and if we take an attitude where we assume that everyone that we meet is a future friend or already is a friend, it changes the way that we engage in conversations, and it changes the way that we see and understand the other person. So we look at someone and we say, I assume that we are going to become friends, that we have things in common, and we find that that actually ends up being more true than false.
Create a comfortable environment.
This is about the physical things that we can do to make people feel welcome. When people come into a house, make sure you greet them right away, and if it's a new person, make sure you remember their name. Make sure that there's plenty of food available so that people aren't worried about food running out. We know now that when someone has something in their hands to hold, they feel more comfortable. So offer them a glass of water or a drink or something that they can immediately start to have in their hands. Little things make a big difference.
Invite people into conversation.
This is really important. We need to learn how to ask really good questions that get to more than just surface issues like, what did you do this week? Or what do you think of the weather? But we also need to learn how to listen really well. The most welcoming thing we can do sometimes is actually hear what somebody says instead of deciding what the next thing we're going to say is going to be. And when we do that, we find that we can actually have conversations that last beyond each of us saying our piece, but instead actually get to know someone and make them feel like they are heard and welcomed. But creating a culture of welcome is not all rainbows and unicorns. There are some trip-ups that can get in the way too. Let's make sure that we don't do these things.
Unintentional inwardness.
There's this story with the early church as they're beginning to grow.
In Acts 2:46-47.
And these people are starting to share meals, and they're growing closer and closer in relationship, and they're really becoming focused on caring for one another. But at the end of the story, we hear that God is adding to their number daily. So somehow they had this ability to balance being a church that cared deeply for one another, and yet at the same time being accessible for outsiders into the community. So we have to do that ourselves, and one way that we need to be really careful of is by not having exclusive conversations that keep people on the outside. If I'm sitting at a meal community and I'm having a conversation with Ian about a new job that he just started, and someone walks over and joins us, it's really important for me to say, hey, Ian and I are just chatting about his new job and I was asking him how it's going. Something simple like that immediately brings that person into the conversation instead of them remaining an outsider and feeling like they're not fully involved.
Putting unspoken conditions on welcome.
Sometimes communities can have these rules where there's little things where people realize that if they do them or don't do them, they're kind of not fully accepted. Our meal communities share food, but sometimes someone will show up and they forget to bring something, or they were too busy, or they bring last night's leftovers. All of those things are okay, but it's important that meal communities work hard to say everybody can be welcome no matter what. Sometimes somebody will show up with rambunctious children, and they can quickly know if you see that their kids are a nuisance and feel like you'd wish that they weren't around, or if you realize that life is messy and chaotic and maybe this can be a wonderful place for them to be loved. It's really important that we don't have unspoken rules that keep people on the outside.
Not taking our welcome far enough.
This one's really important. Sometimes when we talk about hospitality and welcome, we think that it's just about making people feel comfortable and welcomed into our lives. But like we talked about in our identity video, if the foundation is God's love that we're working with, then what we want to do is move people all the way, not just from feeling welcome toward us, but understanding that God is inviting them into a transformative experience of following Jesus. So we want the end goal to not just be that people are welcomed here, but that they're welcomed into the heart of God. All right, now it's your turn. We've laid out our part, now you do yours. Take a look at these discussion questions and have some conversation with your meal community as to how all of this is going to look, creating a welcoming environment in your context.
Who else did Jesus welcome, and how were they affected by it?
Again, it's okay to page through the Gospels here.
What subtle things might accidentally hinder a new person from feeling welcomed in this group? What ground rules are necessary for this to be a truly welcoming meal community? Where do I sense an opportunity for my own growth in this area?